Socrates on page 27 really asks, what kind of thing is the soul? What are we talking about? And especially, is it the kind of thing that it makes sense to say that it could die? Well, it really would depend on what kind of thing it is, right? In the Bhagavad Gita, the great Hindu poem, in which a warrior who's about to enter into battle feels sympathy for the soldiers on the other side and decides that he doesn't want to kill them. The god Krishna tells him, "You're thinking of this thing wrong. It's not like you should want to go out and kill people, but don't make such a big deal of it because you're not really killing them. In the sense that, yes, you're killing their bodies, but their bodies aren't really them. And what they really are is an eternal soul or self, which will continue no matter what you do, because it's not the kind of thing that can die. So don't make such a big deal of it," he seems to be telling the warrior Arjuna. For me, that was a really revelation to read that, not in the sense that it's obviously true or anything, but that what he was trying to say is that you're just not getting it. You're making a mistake about what kind of thing the soul actually is. Some things it makes perfect sense to say that they come into the world and they exist for a while and then they don't exist. But other things, it doesn't make sense to say that of. If we were to think about different sorts of things, there's a building in Athens, which was there at the time of Socrates. I think it was a new building at that time, called the Parthenon, a very beautiful Greek temple. And it's a physical thing. And it's still there. Socrates, saw it, and you can go see it. I could go see it. So we could go and look at something that Socrates has looked at. There's something else that Socrates was aware of. Excuse me. The Pythagorean theorem. He knew about the Pythagorean theorem, the theorem about the relationship between the different sides of a right triangle. So if I asked you the question, well, if you go to Athens and you look at the Parthenon, are you looking at the same building that Socrates looked at 2,500 years ago? I think the answer to that would clearly be yes. And then if I asked you, well, in the meantime, has it undergone any changes? That is, it's the same building that Socrates looked at, but has it changed? I think you would have to say yes, it has changed in those centuries, quite a bit. But then if I asked you, well, when you think of the Pythagorean theorem, we know it in the algebraic form, a squared plus b squared equals c squared. He thought of it, in geometrical way, but we can all see the geometrical, pattern. If I asked you, well, are you thinking of the same thing that Socrates was thinking of? I think the answer to that probably be yes. But then if I asked you whether it has changed in the meantime, well, no, I would say no, it hasn't. It's the same thing. It's exactly the same thing. It's not like the physical object like the Parthenon, which undergoes physical changes, basically deterioration. The Pythagorean theorem, as an idea, hasn't undergone any deterioration in the intervening centuries. It's exactly what it was before. I think keeping this in the background in terms of what Socrates' arguments are for the nature of the soul and the reason why he thinks it couldn't disperse or somehow disintegrate or be destroyed at death, that it's a good thing to keep in mind. Is I mean, we could ask ourselves, is the soul sorry. I guess is kind of like the point that Socrates is making. That if the soul is like the ideas, and certainly most prominently his mind are not mathematical ideas like the Pythagorean theorem, but the forms that we discussed earlier. If the soul is more like the Pythagorean theorem or an intellectual idea, then it's not the kind of thing that can die. You know, when we think of death, we're really thinking of the death of the body, but the body, like the Parthenon, is a physical object which is subject to destruction and decay. If the Pythagorean theorem exists, it doesn't exist in physical form. It exists as an ideal entity. So, in this section of of the dialogue, Socrates is really trying to argue, and this is why the argument is often called in the secondary literature the argument from affinity, that the soul is like these eternal, unchanging realities, the forms, but also mathematical ideas. So he says here on page 29, towards the bottom, he says, consider the matter in yet another way. When the soul and the body are united, nature ordains, sorry,